Warhammer 40k is the most popular tabletop war game in the world. Players can build massive armies and pit them against one another in highly competitive tournaments, massive custom games, or just a game night with the homies. But 40k has also been around for a very long time. As such, it has a lot of lore and models that go along with it. And that can seem pretty overwhelming at first glance when you're trying to get into the hobby. So in this series, I will walk you through some basic lore about the three armies that I play on the tabletop: Black Templars, Thousand Sons, and Necrons. I'll talk a little bit about how they play and how much it'll approximately cost you to get up to about a 2,000-ish point list. I'm going to assume you already know about the basic mechanics, so I won't get bogged down in that and we can get to what's important. In this video, we're going to dive into my main boys, the Black Templars. So grab your bolter, rev up that chainsword. It's time to crusade for the God Emperor. Welcome back to Starhammer. Let's get started with a little lore about the Space Marines, or the Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines are biologically and technologically augmented super soldiers that serve as the shock troops for the Imperium of Man, which is the largest empire in the galaxy at this time. The Space Marines have been with the Imperium since the Emperor launched his Great Crusade tens of thousands of years ago to unite the galaxy under his banner. However, about half the Space Marine legions would betray the Emperor in the apocalyptic galactic-wide civil war known as the Horus Heresy. The traitors caught the Loyalists by surprise. Led by the sons of Horus Primarch and Imperial War Master Horus Lupercal, the heretic Astartes launched a devastating surprise attack with the massacre of Isfahan IV. Despite the best efforts of the Loyalists, the traitors had succeeded in keeping entire legions out of the war effort, allowing them to pave their way to the Imperium's capital at Terra, or Earth. Eventually, the Emperor and Horus faced off against one another, father versus son. The Emperor defeated Horus, but not before being mortally wounded. He was placed on the Golden Throne by Primarch Rogel Dorn, and there he has remained for the past 10,000 years, slowly rotting away on a failing life support system, while his Astartes have been reorganized into smaller Space Marine chapters by Lord Commander and Regent of the Imperium, the Primarch Robuta Guilliman of the Ultramarines. Here's where the Black Templars come in. A successor of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund, the first captain of the Imperial Fists, gathered the most zealous of his chapter and formed the Black Templars. However, Sigismund refused to follow the newly established Codex Astartes that Guilliman had written to govern the Astartes chapters. Much like his Primarch Rogel Dorn, Sigismund disagreed with the tenets that Guilliman had laid out for the Space Marines. Unlike Dorn, however, Sigismund never ended up complying. Instead, he built one of the largest and most ruthless Space Marine chapters and has been waging a great crusade of its own over the past 10,000 years in an effort to prove their bloody devotion to the Emperor. The Templars are unusual in a lot of ways. While they're not the only chapter to reject some or even all of the Codex Astartes, they are the only chapter to openly acknowledge the Emperor's divinity. Because of this, they formed into one of the most aggressive fighting forces the Imperium has to offer. Their zeal freaks out their fellow Space Marines, but one thing is for sure, nobody can question their loyalty to the Emperor or his Imperium. This is reflected in their tabletop counterparts. In the game, Templars have the detachment Righteous Crusaders, which gives all sorts of buffs to your melee attacks. You can give your army lethal hits, sustained hits, anti-psyker 4-up with a 4-up invuln against psychic damage, or a 6-up Feel No Pain and a 5-up leadership. Using melee buffs in conjunction with the Space Marine Army rule Oath of Moment will allow you to reroll your hit rolls as well, maximizing your chances to dish out a ton of damage on your target of choice for all of your units. As you've probably guessed, the Templars are primarily a melee army. That's not to say that you can't play them as a shooty army though. Now, you might have some folks be like, but if you don't run all or mostly melee, you aren't even playing Black Templars properly. Don't listen to those nerds. You can play them however you want, and anyone who tells you otherwise is a fucking loser dork whose lunch money you should take. Personally, I like to switch it up depending on who I'm up against. For example, Orcs are an army that I can keep up with in melee, and I just think it's a ton of fun to fight them toe-to-toe. So I'll run a mostly melee list. But if I'm fighting Tyranids, I like to have a nice, even spread of long-range shooters and heavy guns to lay down a bunch of fire to clear mobs and cover my melee squads while they move up the board. And don't think you're stuck with the Righteous Crusader detachment rules either. As a Space Marines army, you can use all of the different attachments. The only thing to note here is that you can't use chapter-specific rules or units. So basically, like, you can't use Lionel Johnson or any rules that would be Dark Angel specific. Similarly, other Space Marine armies can't use Black Templar units or rules. Every Space Marine detachment has a little theme to it. For example, the Anvil Siege Force pays homage to the nature of the Imperial Fists by giving you the Shield of the Imperium rule, which gives your ranged weapons a buff to hit and adds 1 to your wound roll for remaining stationary on that turn. I won't go through them all here, but there's a detachment rule for pretty much any list you want to build. Back to Templars though. Being a Space Marine army gives you access to a lot of different units that allow you to build your forces exactly how you want them. Have legions of Assault Intercessors storm across the battlefield while Stormhawk Interceptors scream overhead as they rain down fire from the sky. Or lead your legions of Sword Brethren across no man's land as High Marshal Helbrecht, chainswords revving as you rip and tear your way through the enemy line. Space Marine armies possess one of the widest breadths of playstyles on the tabletop. An IRL example of Space Marine versatility happened just the other day. So I was playing a huge game with a few of the homies. We had designed a special mission where the Space Marines were to hold off an ever-growing Tyranid invasion force from entering our command bunker and destroying our AA guns. We could score by killing enemy units, and for each round we kept them out. Tyranids scored based on destroying the wall and the AA guns, or could make a beeline to the command bunker to win the game outright. The AA guns prevented the Tyranids from using deep strikes and things like that, and their forces grew bigger and scarier with every round. It's sort of like wave defense with extra steps. The field was pretty simple. We had 2 AA guns on elevated positions, the command bunker between them, and a massive wall stretching the width of the board with a trench line in front of that. My job was to hold the trench. My partner, who was playing Salamanders with the Anvil Siege attachment I mentioned earlier, was to protect the guns in the bunker while providing me with covering fire from the wall and the few other elevated positions. So he's running like 99% range units on his list, like a Repulsor Executioner, Redemptive Dreadnought, Stern Guards, while I'm running 99% melee with Sword Brothers, Bladeguard Vets, and Primaris Crusader squads. It helped that we orchestrated our list before this big game, but made sure to layer our defenses appropriately. An example of that would be that behind my Bladeguard Vets, he had a line of Infernus Marines, with their flamethrowers ready to soften up Termagant or Hormagant hordes before they met the shield wall, which would finish them off. I won't waste your time here going into story time, but it's a testament to how well multiple types of units can work very well together, like Infernus Squad and Bladeguard Vets. While running a melee army in most games is cinematic and thematic and the proper way to run Templars, thematic armies rarely win games, at least in my experience. If you want to just have fun, then by all means go for it. But I found that having a nice mix of units that complement each other leads to a better odds of actually winning. While you can play them however you want, Templars have a couple of chapter-specific units you can run, and most of their abilities and such rely on them being in melee, which this army excels at. So let's go over a few of those. Starting off with my personal favorite, the Emperor's Champion. This guy is probably my favorite unit, which I recently just repainted. Check out my community tab to see that. And he's rarely let me down on the board. This guy's whole shtick is fighting enemy character units. As such, his black sword has precision and is utterly devastating to anyone unlucky enough to stand in front of him. His skillful parry ability allows you to say "nuh-uh" to a melee attack that would otherwise hit you once per phase by changing that damage characteristic to 0. With Sigismund's Heir, you can add 1 to your wound rolls against character units. You can run this guy with a big meat wall of Assault Intercessors to give him some cushion and the ability to reroll 1s on the wound roll. I had this guy do a 1v1 with Canis Rex, an Imperial Knight character, and he came out on top. To this day, that is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen, and I will always bring it up whenever I get the chance. Coming in next, we've got the legend himself, High Chaplain Grimaldus, accompanied by 3 servitors carrying relics that give his unit a 5-foot field nothing, improve AP by 1, or the ability to charge after advancing or falling back. With his litanies of the devout ability, every model in his unit can reroll the hit roll on their melee attacks. I found him to be the perfect addition to a squad of sword bros, as he complements their abilities very, very well. Which is who we're going to get into now. Sword Brethren are the melee unit for Templars, and you might want to always have at least one of these squads if you can. Each model is equipped with some sort of power weapon, with 2 being able to run lightning claws and a thunder hammer. With their Vowsworn Bladesman ability, at the start of the fight phase, they can choose to either add 1 to their attack characteristic or to their damage characteristic. Lastly, we've got the boss man himself, High Marshal Helbrecht. This guy's an absolute beast on the board. I'll throw his weapon stats up here, so you can pause and read those, but his abilities Crusade of Wrath and High Marshal are real treats. With Crusade of Wrath, Helbrecht adds 1 strength to all melee weapons for models in his unit. and allows them to crit on a 5-up instead of a 6-up. With High Marshal, you can pick an enemy within engagement range at the start of the fight, and roll a d6, dishing out d3 mortal wounds at the least, or 6 at the most. Remember that in a lot of cases, mortals usually can't be saved against. This unit really comes in clutch for softening up a larger enemy, or even just axing models entirely, so you don't have to engage them at all. With Sword Brethren, I would say Helbrecht is the better pick over Grimaldus, but they're both worth 120 points, so that's only one tiny thing to keep in mind. Primaris Crusader Squads are your main melee unit. The way I run them is 1 Sword Bro, 5 Initiates, and 4 Neophytes. They got a few different loadout options, like Power Fists and Chain Swords, but their real strength is in their numbers and their ability to reroll advance and charge rolls. If you attach one of your high value characters to them, your opponent's gonna have to chew through a 10-man meat wall to even put a dent in them unless they have precision. PCSs are a great unit in general, but really, really great if you want to keep your characters alive for a lot longer. Now, for some of the other unit recommendations, I would try and run just about every game would be a Transport or 2, a Dreadnought or Tank, and heavy Intercessors or a Sternguard Vet Squad. Most people would tell you to use Land Raiders as the primary means of transport, and I would agree. They're super tough, they have a lot of guns, and they can carry a lot of models. However, they're pretty pricey in points, and IRL, a good alternative is an Repulsor. This little dude doesn't carry a lot of models, but he can zoom around the battlefield, he holds his own in ranged combat, and has firing deck that allows your models that are embarked within the transport to shoot as well. I say take the Land Raider every time if you can, but if you need some cheap, fast, and capable transport, the Repulsor does the trick. The Intercessors and Sternguard and tanks give you ranged capability. But what I really want to focus on is the Dreadnought. The Brutalis Dreadnought has these pinchy claw hands, and at 160 points are criminally cheap, and you should always run at least one because of it. I know, I said you can run Templars however you want, but this guy is the one I won't let you get away with not having on your list. I dropped the melee attack blocks here so you can get an idea of what this thing can do when combined with your Templar vows, on top of dealing mortals on the charge. If you aren't running him with talons, you're wrong. Run a Redemptor if you want a Dreadnought with guns. The Brutalis is mean on the board. I've had this guy take down Repulsor Executioner tanks, Carnifexes, you name it. He's an invaluable asset to your list, and I can't stress enough how much you should be running at least one. But let's get to the elephant in the room. What about cost? Well, generally speaking, Space Marines can be around medium to high based on how you want to build out your army. Like I said, you've got near limitless options, from aircraft to ATVs to assault intercessors, and everything in between. Personally, I would start with a Black Templars Combat Patrol, a Brutalis Dreadnought, an Emperor's Champion, Sword Bros, and a shooty unit or two like Sternguard. I think this gives you a nice starting point and covers all the bases to give you a nice hybrid list. It'll also cost you around 337 USD if you're getting them on Amazon, not including paints and stuff. And don't be afraid to buy other Space Marine models from other combat patrols and boxes as well. I'm getting the Dark Angels one myself and turning them into Templars. It's got a captain, Hellblasters, Bladeguard Vets, and Intercessors in it, so none of them are faction specific. GW even sells kits that are nothing but Black Templar sprues, so that you can convert other models if you want to. Anyway, I built a sample list, which I will drop in the description and pinned comment, that is around 2k points and covers a little bit of everything. I tried to make this competitive and fun, but hopefully it can serve as a starting point for your own. Prices aren't going to vary much, but sometimes you can find models a little cheaper on Amazon, so I'd recommend starting there. Your wallet's going to cry a little bit either way though. Remember, no matter what me or anyone else says, it's your army, and you build them how you want. The rule of cool trumps all. And hey man, as long as you're crusading for the Emperor, you're cool in my book. But that's all I've got for this one, y'all. I hope I helped you out a little bit and helped introduce you to Space Marines and Black Templars in general. Templars are fantastic and a fun army to play with fascinating lore and badass models. Don't forget to drop a like if you liked it, a subscribe if you really liked it, and let me know in the comments what you thought. Follow me on Instagram and shit too, because I'm going to try to post there and in more places like that. I'll see y'all in the next one. Toodles.